a lot of attention and accolades, including today for his great role in bringing consciousness around the issue of climate. I want to say that when I was growing up, we never called it climate, it was always environment. And, but I remember that religion was always a part of this conversation, and his value system, his belief system, his faith, and his deep desire to engage faith leaders was always a part of this for him. He has indeed written some bestsellers and won some prizes, and I must say though that the most impressive thing about my father is how he has handled adversity and challenge and disappointment, and I am so deeply moved watching him do that, and I feel that it's because at heart he is a servant. He serves. He serves his people, he serves his country, and I think we can all say now, whatever the word used to be, he serves Mother Earth. Thank you, Dad.
Speaking of my work, honestly, I have learned so many insights from Corinna that I never would have found accessible to me except for her. And that's been going on for quite a long time, but all the more so here at the Center for Earth Ethics, Corinna, and to you and your colleagues. So I'm very, and to you and your colleagues at Union, congratulations and thank you. I'll come back to that, but I first want to pay my respects to my fellow panelists, starting with Chief Oren Lyons. We're all honored to be in your presence, Chief Lyons, and I've learned a great deal from you over the years. We have been at the same meetings going on for decades, and also I like to hear you talk. I like the way you talk. Puts me in a soothing. There's a deep well of wisdom there. Dr. Rick Clegston and Michael Gerard, thank you. These two, as you will hear from yourself, and as many of you already know, are so distinguished and such tremendous leaders. I look forward to hearing from them. Okay, I am going to try to cover a little bit of ground in a short period of time so that we can get on with the entirety of this panel and then go to your questions. Just this morning or yesterday, NASA announced that this summer just about to conclude is by far the hottest summer in the history of global record keeping. Tomorrow, NOAA will announce the same thing. The Japanese agency did the same thing this year. When it is concluded, the odds are now 99. I don't know the specific statistic, but the scientists are telling me that it's virtually certain that this year will be the hottest year ever measured by a considerable margin, absent some extremely unusual downturn in temperatures in the final couple of months of the year. And so it's just more evidence, and every morning and every evening on the television news, it's like, as I've said on other occasions, a nature hike through the book of Revelation. Just this morning, the incredible fires in the west and the downpours in the southwest, and the list is quite a long one, and I'm not going to take much time, but it's just a reminder that we are gathering at a moment in time when the signs of dramatic change and both peril and promise for our future are all around us, and most of us here know that very, very well. Most of us know that on this day we will, as a species, put another 110 million tons of heat-trapping gas into the thin shell of atmosphere surrounding the planet. The cumulative amount now provides as much extra heat energy as would equal the energy released by 400,000 Hiroshima-class atomic bombs exploding every 24 hours. And so we have to change course, and we have to, what was your phrase, Oren, value change for survival. So let me say a few words about how the title of this session is, of course, discussion of the transformation of our legal, economic, and cultural structures to mitigate climate change and address its root causes. So all of those structures are structures that we develop. We have inherited many of them, but we have the duty to revisit the structures within which we live our lives and make an assessment as to whether they need to be updated in light of new knowledge, whether or not they're still serving their original purposes or not. And where value is concerned, how do we recognize what is valuable? How do we see what is valuable? Because looking is not the same as seeing. And the Proverbs 29, verse 18, where there is no vision, the people perish. One of the best known quotations from my faith tradition, vision is in some translations read as a revelation or prophecy. Perish in some translations is read as the people will run wild into misery. But where there is no vision, people perish. So I'd like to tell three quick stories about vision, really to use it as a metaphor for comprehension, for understanding, for recognition, for revelation, for the ability to see our true circumstances. And let's talk about how we see value. Most all of us, during the years of our schooling, learned about light that we used to see, and learned that it was part of a spectrum of energy, and it's often depicted as an electromagnetic spectrum, usually with a long horizontal box with the different wavelengths of electromagnetic energy, and light is a very thin slice of that spectrum, and gamma rays are the shortest, and radio waves are among the longest, and infrared and ultraviolet and microwaves and all the different wavelengths in between, and visible light, the radiation that gives us the ability to see, that empowers our vision in the physical sense, is less than 0.1% of the total spectrum. And yet, because 70% of our brain is devoted to the optical systems, and since we know that all other sighted people operate the same way, we tend to assume that what we see in the visible light portion of the spectrum is all we need to worry about. That's it. As Abraham Maslow, the great psychologist of value, once said in an aside, if the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. And so we see with our eyes, and we feel safe in ignoring the rest of that spectrum. I had the unusual experience of working for 8 years in the White House and beginning each morning with an hour-long briefing from the intelligence community, which, as you may have read, collects information from all parts of the electromagnetic and God bless them, and thank them for keeping us safe. But I'm not going to divert into a cul-de-sac there. But the picture presented with the benefit of ultraviolet and infrared and signals intelligence and all the rest of it, was a far more complete and accurate picture. So when we look at what is valuable in our economic activities and the way we live our lives, we use certain assumptions about what is worth seeing. What do we see? To change Maslow's aphorism slightly, if the only tool we use for measuring value is a price tag, then those things that do not have price tags attached can seem as if they have no value. And so we look at the sum total of human activities and the activities in our own lives, and we focus on those things that are easily monetized, that have price tags, that we can calculate and add up and keep track of on ledgers and Bloomberg screens. Second story. There is a video available on the internet, one of the, I don't know how many hundreds of millions now, and I would dare say that many of you here have seen it. If you're in the investment world, you probably have. It involves about a dozen people, half of them in white t-shirts and half of them in black t-shirts, and they are passing a basketball or medicine ball from one to the other. Who's seen this video? A few of you, okay, maybe 20%. The rest, I'm going to ruin it for the rest of you, but you can look it up on the internet. And it is used by a psychologist as a little test. And it's about, I don't know, 90 seconds or 2 minutes long. And he says at the beginning, your task is to count the number of times someone in a white t-shirt touches this ball. And so they're milling around and they're passing the ball from one to the other with their different t-shirts. And everyone's looking and counting, and when the video concludes, the question comes, how many, what's your answer, how many? And some say 16, 17, 15, 18. And the moderator says, well, the correct answer is, I forget, but 17. Now, did anyone see the gorilla? And in the many times this test has been run, approximately 90% of the people who watch this do not notice that in the middle of this cluster of people passing the ball around, a large person dressed in a gorilla suit walks right into the middle of the circle, turns to face the camera, and beats the chest of the gorilla suit, and then turns and walks out the other side of the circle. And they replay that portion of the video in slow motion, and people are astonished that they did not see the gorilla in the middle of the circle. Now, there's no magic involved in that. There is a specific psychological phenomenon known, I'm told, as selective attention. And the phenomenon it describes is connected to the deeper truth that we don't actually see with our eyes, we look with our eyes. We see with our comprehension, we see with our brains. Vision, in that sense, occurs when our consciousness registers the shape and meaning of the patterns that are filtered from the visible light spectrum through the optical systems and recognized in our consciousness. If we are so intently focused on a select phenomenon that we are paying all of our attention to, we literally do not see the gorilla in the middle of the room. Here's the third and final story about vision. One of Corinna's sisters, Corinna has a sister who was also like Corinna, a great looker. lacrosse player and a brother who was a great lacrosse player. This was the sister who was a soccer player. And about 15 years ago, I took her to the top of a volcano, a dormant or extinct volcano in Hawaii on the Big Island, Mauna Kea, where they have telescopes. And I know it's the subject of an ongoing controversy there, but what was at that point the most powerful telescope ever built, the KECS, K-E-C-K-S, because it's plural, there are two of them, part of the same system. The most powerful telescopes funded by a donor who insisted that they push the limits of what was then technologically possible, and they incorporated all of these new innovations, but one of them struck my attention. The two telescopes are identical. They focus on the same object. They're about 100 yards apart. When they focus on a supernova 100 million light years away, that separation of 100 yards makes all the difference in the amount of meaning that can be harvested from seeing that supernova. That small distance in between one perspective and another. So when the Iroquois nation became a democracy, and when our founders, with many sources of wisdom at their disposal, chose to become a representative democracy, we did so because of conceptions of justice, but there was also a very practical reason. Some contemporary thinkers refer to the wisdom of crowds. And indeed, there is a very deep meaning in the wisdom of crowds. One of the professors at Columbia Business School teaches a course that was once taught by Warren Buffett's mentor, I'm blanking on his name now.
Graham.
Pardon me?
Graham.
Ben Graham, who really was the teacher of Warren Buffett. And this current professor begins each semester with a glass bottle of jelly beans and passes it around to all of the students and asks each student to write down his or her estimate of how many jelly beans are in this jar. And the average guess is 50% wrong, either too many or too few. But the average of all of the guesses is almost always within a few beans of the correct answer. Why is that? It is connected to the principle that makes those two telescopes far more valuable, being separated by a short distance. The value of diversity in the different life experiences and perspectives of those of different ages, ethnicities, genders, orientations, backgrounds, and all of the other differences we could cite, enable us as a group of people to understand a great deal more about any phenomena that we are trying to see. The United States of America rose to the position of being respected by the community of nations more than any other in the 20th century. In part because we made better decisions over an extended period of time than others, because in turn we harvested the wisdom of crowds by using the brilliant software, if you will, of the U.S. Constitution to regulate, collect, and process the collective wisdom of what the American people were seeing. And yes, finally we added women, and yes, I hope we will soon continue removing the restrictions that are preventing so many African Americans still from voting. And again, that's not my subject today, but our diversity is an enhancement of our ability to see. Let me close by parlaying this to a specific way that we now try to see what is valuable in the economy. In 1930, in a way that blinds us to the economic and other impact of those 110 million tons of heat-trapping gas pollution that we're putting into the atmosphere today. And the other negative externalities, the consequences of irresponsible fracking, you can form your own list. But what's not often noted as well is that it blinds us to the value of positive externalities. What's a positive externality? If a community invests in mental health care or child services, it is logged as an expense, but the benefits that come rolling back into the community over the years ahead are not measured. We are blind to them. We don't see them. Secondly, it does not measure the depletion of natural resources. Like, for example, underground fresh water supplies, as Betty was telling us at the lunch session. How do we put a value on water? Well, we don't. We don't officially. It is not measured. Clean air, a climate balance that supports the flourishing of humankind, the beauty of the sunset and all of the other examples that you can find. We do not measure the depletion of the topsoil along with the groundwater. Third, it does not measure inequality. Inequality in incomes or net worths. So that if we have a 3% increase in GDP, that is cause for universal celebration, say perhaps by those who notice that the median income goes down 3%. And if the distributional effects of the choices we make lead to this gross, obscene accumulation of income and net worth at the very top of the income scale and depresses the incomes of others, we don't see it. We don't measure it. We don't see that gorilla either. So I'll conclude with this. Why don't we change it? Well, part of it is we have the so-called QWERTY problem. You know, the keyboard, the QWERTY on the keyboard on the typewriter. Perhaps most of you know this story. That was designed that way because the first typewriters had metal keys that would jam, and so they purposely designed the keyboard to make it as difficult as possible to type fast. And now we can change the keyboards in an instant with the electronic systems, but we don't do it because I and most of you learned to type the old way, and it's a hassle to change that. So we go hunting for keys with the little finger, and we make a lot of mistakes. And so GDP is a QWERTY issue, but it's more than that as well. There are vested interests who like the current system. But in order to see what we are doing, we have to make changes in the instruments we use to extend our vision, in the ways we focus our concentration, in the choices we make about what we pay attention selectively to. Finally, I am an optimist. I don't deal in false hope. Much damage has been done, and consequences will be suffered. But there is reason for legitimate hope that we can still construct a future that will avoid the worst that would otherwise befall us, and that will give us the joy of being a generation of people alive in this extraordinary time that constructs a legitimate basis for telling our children and grandchildren that better days are ahead, because we have seen what we must do. Every cause that has a moral basis, and yes, this is a moral issue and not a political issue. It is unfortunately also a political issue, but it is fundamentally a moral issue. And every great cause, whether abolition or women's suffrage or GLBTQ rights or the civil rights movement, every one of them has begun to succeed and move toward victory when it was resolved into a binary choice between what is right and what is wrong. The great challenge is seeing through the clutter, through all of these institutions and law and culture and economics and all the rest, all the way, whether it's 100 million light years away, to the simple choice: what is right and what is wrong. We have right on our side, and therefore we shall prevail.